That's it. So here we are, a few pilgrims together. Others could not make it. Umbria is a very pleasant region, and it has a history that goes back to actually the ancient Romans. Assisi was a strategic place, but also the Romans very quickly realized that it was very nice for second residences, very pleasant. It was like their Florida, if you may think of it. Um, 800 years ago, Assisi became actually very famous because of one of the citizens of Assisi, a man named Francesco. And that man started a movement based on the gospel, the good news of Jesus, basically a movement of social justice, seeking God's reign and God's justice. He attracted very quickly many men, many women. The most famous woman is named Chiara, and their characteristic was that they're related as one family, as brothers and sisters. So with that in mind, now this evening, imagine that we are taking a bus that will take us to southern Umbria, about an hour and a half in the bus, to the beautiful Rieti Valley. Francesco always loved that Rieti Valley and the people there. Very friendly, very hospitable. In each village he would go and he would become friends with people. And one village in particular was very dear to him, the village of Greccio, and that is where we're going. In Greccio, Francesco had become friend with an important man in the village, Signore Giovanni. And one year, we were in 1223, Francis, with Giovanni, decided that they wanted to celebrate Christmas. They wanted to celebrate Christmas together. That was 3 years before Francis actually died in 1226. I must say, before we move farther, think we're still in the bus driving there, that Christmas was really very important to Francis. It's the celebration of Jesus's birthday. Now, of course, nobody knew when Jesus was born. It's the early Christians that decided that they would celebrate Jesus's birth at the winter solstice. The winter solstice, when the light begins to grow again. Well, they did not know that their computation was wrong, because the solstice is on December 21st. Anyway, it was at that time, they thought it was on December 25th, and that's how we got Christmas, on December 25th. For Francesco, it was the most important day of the year. He would go absolutely nuts on that day. He says that everybody should rejoice, everybody should have a lot of food, even including the animals. They should be fed very well, because he was always wondering about why in Jesus God decided to become human, while we are always trying to become God. We have enough examples nowadays. I will not comment on that. God becoming human in all the fragility and vulnerability of a little baby, not even coming from heaven as already an adult human being. No, just come as every human being comes into this world. That, on the one side, was a wonder for Francis and those with him. It also revealed the preciousness of being human. We human beings are precious. Now, until today, the people in Greccio remember how in 1223 Francesco and Giovanni and the people celebrated Christmas in a very different way, not in the church of the village. And so every year they celebrate that, they reenact that in their own way. They want to make it very theatrical. Italians like theater. Italians like representation, spectacle, show. So before we ourselves are arriving in Greccio, while we are still in the bus, I would like to show you a little video how the people in Greccio nowadays still every year celebrate Christmas. It's a festival. It's a small video with a lot of humor. The soundtrack is in Italian, but there are English subtitles. So we're going to see that while still in the bus, if the technology allows us. Fingers crossed. So far.
Sono a Greccio, piccolo borgo in provincia di Rieti e luogo importante nella vita della gente. Ho un'idea! Dopo Rossellini, Zeffirelli e la Cavani, anche io avrò il mio film su San Francesco. I miei attori saranno, come nei film di Pasolini, gli abitanti stessi di Greccio e sono in camerino a vestirsi con i vestiti d'epoca, fatti da loro. I preparativi sul set avanzano, ma qualcuno ha dei dubbi. Volevo sapere, siamo filologici?
E sulla plastica discuterei, ma sul resto va bene.
È il mio San Francesco, chi lo interpreta. Non sarà Mickey Rourke, non sarà Elio Germano, ma anche Federico, il vice sindaco, se la può cavare. E invece tu sei abbastanza filologico. Scalzo.
Fanno così come portano.
Se proprio devo.
Va bene, devi. Tutto è pronto. Con il rullo dei tamburi diamo inizio alle riprese. Ecco, questa è la location giusta. Siamo all'entrata del castello di Greccio. Scusate, questa è bella. È vero? In questa scena San Francesco, accompagnato da altri 2 frati, entra nel castello di Greccio. Ok, guarda che gentili, vanno su scalzi. È stupendo, dai. Sì, ma mentre entrano i frati dovrebbero cantare.
Avevamo la base sotto.
Ma meglio, dice...
Però noi 3 che cantiamo.
Ci mettiamo un gregoriano peso.
Un gregoriano
Va bene,
peso.
dai, va bene, facciamo.
La cantavate voi, dovete sapere.
Massimiliano. Vabbè, ma tanto la voce non viene registrata, ci mettiamo il gregoriano.
Va bene il gregoriano, ma per fare il nostro film serve un labiale? Ci siamo! Colossal! Laudato
sia il Signore nelle gioie e nel dolore.
Vai!
Salvaguarda i tuoi fedeli.
Bello! Lo mettiamo in bianco e nero o in seppia e funziona benissimo.
Non siamo matti,
Siamo belli qua,
Siamo
matti.
Giorno e notte a tutte l'ore.
Come sono andati? Bene, bravi, benissimo. Questo era un castello in realtà.
Sì, questo era il castello di Giovanni Velita, il fidatario di Greccio che aiutò proprio San Francesco nel 1223 a rappresentare per la prima volta la nascita del Signore.
Adesso ci vorrebbe il feudatario. Lei è
Il Velita.
il Velita. Si dà la mano o non si dà la mano? No, non si dà la mano. Per carità. Quindi lei è un feudatario.
Il signore di Greccio, il signore fidatario del castello di Greccio. Era un guerriero, quando ha conosciuto San Francesco, ha diciamo appesa la spada al chiodo e ha seguito San Francesco.
Bello! Il popolo sta arrivando.
Sì, sì.
A questo punto voglio vederlo, l'incontro di Francesco con il feudatario, vero? Vediamo un po' cosa succede.
E così Francesco d'Assisi, quale buone nove da Roma.
Regola e presepe approvati.
Il presepe, ho sentito bene?
Oh Giovanni, amico caro, ho vissuto giorni e giorni in queste grotte pensando al presepe. Voglio realizzare un presepe con bambini veri.
No, aspetta.
Andava bene l'abbraccio?
Sì.
Non mi ricordo. Vedi un attimo su Google. Trovo il copione. Da bambini veri va bene, bambini veri, cambiamo inquadratura.
Vorrei raffigurare il bambino nato in Bethlehem e in qualche modo vedere con gli occhi del corpo i disagi in cui si trovava per la mancanza di quanto occorre ad un neonato.
Bellissimo. Ma Francesco come convinse il Velita?
Per amore del Signore, fatemi questa grazia.
Immagino che vorrei mangiatoia con la paglia, il bue, l'asinello.
Sì, proprio così.
La notte del 24 dicembre il vostro sogno diventerà la realtà.
E te cosa dici? Se buio e un bel applauso!
No, e poi
Quanti anni è che le rappresentate?
Dal 1973.
Beh, insomma, te lo potevi anche ricordare.
No, io da meno.
Allora, adesso andiamo al santuario. Dai. Questa è la scena dove appunto viene fatto il presepe. È bellissimo! La mucca e l'asino sono vere?
Sono veterani del presepe, come protagonisti, quindi.
La scena com'è?
C'è San Francesco che fa un dialogo.
Allora cominciamo.
Fratelli, è in una notte come questa, in questa stessa semplicità, che è nato il Salvatore.
Ringraziamo tutto il popolo di Greccio che ha partecipato a questo colossal. E vai con l'ultimo ciak. Azione! San Francesco, che cosa ci dici?
Questo è il presepe vivente di Greccio, la nostra tradizione e il nostro vanto. E quindi vi aspettiamo ogni Natale qui a Greccio per assistere al primo presepe del mondo.
I think it's a very good rendition of what the people in Greccio nowadays are doing, what they remember and the way they like to celebrate. It's not sad, you can tell. It's very lively. Anyway, now we have arrived in Greccio, and we have arrived at the Eremo, the place that was developed after that celebration. You can see it behind me in the sky. It started with building a little chapel where the event happened, and then little by little with the centuries they built more and more and more, because also every year there are hundreds, thousands of people visiting, pilgrims going to that place in Greccio, outside of the village of Greccio. Now you've seen how they celebrate, how they elaborate the whole story. Let's get inside the Eremo, what they call the santuario, the sanctuary, and let's go to the little chapel where that they build on the place where, according to the tradition, the celebration happened. So on the rock and under the rock, Francis loved caverns. According to the tradition, this is where the event happened. Now there are some fresco there to remember the event. You see that there is like a table, an altar, and on the rocks there is a little representation of the baby Jesus. But more important and more ancient is on the wall there are two frescoes. At the time in the Middle Ages and for a little bit after that, you know, most people were illiterate. I mean, they were not able to read and, of course, to write. So pictorial representation were very important. We may be getting back into something like this today with the internet and Netflix, etc. Maybe people look at representations more than they read about it. But that was definitely the case at that time. You have the wall divided in two. On the left, it's supposed to be the representation of the Christmas with Francis and the people of Greccio. And on the right, it's supposed to be the reality with Mary, Joseph, and the baby Jesus. So let's take a look, closer look. Here it is. You can see on the left that Francis is kneeling in front of a baby Jesus. You have a priest with a chalice, bread. On the left behind Francis, you have the people from Greccio, the first one being Giovanni. And then on the far left, you have a picture of Saint Mary Magdalene. Saint Mary Magdalene, the closest woman to Jesus after his mother, has been very present in all the early Franciscan movement. And on the right, you have the representation of what happened in the wilderness outside of Bethlehem, because there was no room for them. Mary is there, and let's move on to see more in detail. Mary is there with the baby, and you have Joseph on the right. The fresco has been damaged, so you don't see much of the donkey and the ox. The Italians have absolutely no problem to see human reality the way it is. Maybe today Mary would have been arrested for breastfeeding Jesus, so obviously, but it was not a problem at that time and in those places. I feel bad for Joseph, because obviously he's trying to understand what's going on. He did not know. He was following. It's not exactly what he had thought of, or so we have that reality there. Here is Mary, and here is Francis. So that's very, very devotional. Baby Jesus with eyes wide open, looking at Francis. Obviously, Francis and the baby Jesus take the center of the picture. There is a priest on the right, and there are the people of Greccio that are there. But as I said, the front stage is just Francis and Jesus. Now back to us. After seeing that, after seeing how people in Greccio cheerfully celebrate every year, after seeing how they represented that in the little chapel that was built where the event happened, it is time for us to raise the question, what did really happen at that Christmas 1223 in Greccio? Do we have any other information than how people of Greccio are doing it, and it's wonderful, and that fresco on the wall of the chapel? You know, with time going, a popular story, all popular stories evolve. If memory is able to forget, memory is also able to embellish. And it's what happens, and it's what happened with many stories regarding, in particular, Francis. As many times that a story is told, come new details and new emphasis. So where do we find the oldest version of the Christmas at Greccio, and by whom? We find it in a book titled The Life of Saint Francis, written 5 years after, 2 years after he died in 1228, which means 5 years after the Christmas in Greccio. That book was written by a brother, Fra Tommaso da Celano. Celano is a small town in Abruzzo. Tommaso had known Francesco personally, and it may not be impossible that he himself has been part of the event when we read the way he describes it. And so how does Tommaso tell the story? Well, Francesco and Signore Giovanni are friends, and they talk of celebrating Christmas in Greccio that year of 1223. I'm saying they talk because according to what Tommaso wrote, there is a dialogue there. It's not clear if Francesco wanted to celebrate that year in Greccio, or Giovanni asked Francesco, could we celebrate Christmas in Greccio this year? Anyway, they agreed and they prepared it. Actually, the first element that is important to note is that they will not celebrate Christmas in Greccio, but they will celebrate Christmas outside of Greccio. The same way that Jesus was not born in Bethlehem, but outside of Bethlehem, because there was no room for them in Bethlehem. That's an important point. So they're not going to be celebrating in the church of the village. What Francesco wants, and we read that in the text of Tommaso, he wants to commemorate the memory of that child who was born in Bethlehem, to see as much as possible with his own bodily eyes the discomfort of his infant needs, how he was laid in a manger over hay with an ox and a donkey standing by. So that's what Francis wants. So with the help of the people of Greccio, Giovanni prepared everything. And then what happened on that night? Well, in the middle of the night, somewhere outside of Greccio, now we know where, with candles and torches, Francesco and his brothers, Giovanni and all the village, including the priest, gathered around a manger with hay, put between an ox and a donkey. That's it. In the middle of the night. It's cold, it's dark, and the whole village is there. With a manger with hay between an ox and a donkey. And in that setting, Francesco sang the story, as in the gospel, of the birth of Jesus. And now everybody joined in singing, rejoicing, and then happily went back home. There was no Mary. There was no Joseph. There was no baby Jesus. There was just that material setting and all the people of Greccio together. So more than remembering what happened, they experienced the conditions, the destitutions of Jesus's birth. And what was brought to them, all of them together, was gratitude for what had happened and joy for what had happened. And the celebration was, yes, a representation, a reenaction. There was no need for Mary and Joseph. They were not there. Francesco, Giovanni, and all the people of Greccio were there in that situation. And I like to say that together they reimagined Christmas. They represented Christmas. It was a community celebrating the essential of Christmas. Simplicity, humility, sharing, and joy. I'll drink to that. Amen. If you have any remark or questions, they're welcome.
Just lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you had the opportunity to be present for those celebrations?
No, unfortunately not. But I have been several times in Greccio, and I talked with groups of pilgrims, and I talked the same way, and even more. I could go on with the symbol of the manger, with the baby Jesus put in a manger. What is in a manger is food for people. And so it's very clear in the way Tommaso writes his story that he already makes a link with what will come at the end of Jesus's life when he offers himself for the life of others.
Francois, if I could just add the comment that, as you can see from the photo behind him, the buildings that are there now, which were added to that original cave, are literally on the side of the mountain.
Yeah.
And you climb and you climb and you climb to get there. So the inconvenience and the experience of even getting to the place, I think, helped the people understand the inconvenience of Mary and Joseph, you know, in their travel. And I love your comment, Jean-François, about more than anything, they could experience the hardship in that physical place. And that's one of the hardships for me, even today. That climb is something that I think twice about.
Yeah.
And some of them were barefooted.
Well, most of them probably.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but very good natured, those Italian people, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I have a feeling they didn't all go straight home. I think there must have been a few places to stop and enjoy before they went to bed.
Yes. And what Tommaso doesn't say, excuse me, what he says is that they were carrying candles and torches. I can't imagine that they weren't carrying more than that.
Little beverage.
Yeah,
I would say so.
yeah.
Yes.
A flask of some sort.
Something for the road. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think you're when you talked about the manger without the Jesus and Mary and all, and focusing on the difficult, the rudiments of that's different, because once you put in the baby and Mary, you forget everything else.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. It becomes an object. Without Mary and the baby, we're all in it. But people
Also
need
gives you
representation.
Also
Yes,
gives
Linda.
you that sense of waiting and expectation.
Mhm.
So are we
you,
all going to
Jean-François.
Greccio?
That video was priceless. That was very, very good. Yeah.
I looked for several videos online, and I had another one that is slightly longer and that I like very much because it shows people that I know in the video.
Wow.
But this one is definitely centered on the people of Greccio celebrating, reenacting in their own way with addition of details. But yes, I agree. It is priceless.
Jean-François, what's the modern day population of Greccio?
Oh, I don't know exactly, but it may be 1,500 people, if so. If you count all the little houses outside of the village. You know, the village is like so many, especially when you saw in the at the beginning in the first video, the castle. Yes, on top of that hill, there was a castle. So with a lord and people living around, they could also get protection in the castle when there was some danger. It's in modern times then people build houses around that hill. But so within the limit of the commune of what we'd call the township of Greccio, I wouldn't think more than 1,500 people nowadays. In that time, it was much smaller. It must have been 500 people, maybe. And but what Tommaso says, it's like most people of the village, all the people who were able to walked outside of the village to go to the celebration.
You were very, very close. I just looked it up, 1,529.
Ah,
You're a good guesser.
Wow, excellent.
wow.
We have quite a secretary in the village.
She is
So-
very efficient.
Yes.
Very efficient.
How far is Perugia, if you can see it in the distance? So it's got a,
The distance between the village and excuse me, and the Eremo. Well, if it's for a bird, it's probably a little over half a mile. But in terms of walking, you have to come down the hill of the village and then go back to the hill where they celebrated. That would be a mile and a half, and it would take probably over half an hour of walking.
Jean-François, Kim, did you ask about Perugia?
I did.
Oh, that's Jean-François, that wasn't my.
But what did you say?
So you're asking how far was Perugia from Greccio or from Assisi?
Oh, Perugia is about, what is it, 16 miles away from Assisi.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay, because in that intro picture you had said, and then you can see the lights of Perugia in the background. So I just was wondering what the distance was.
yes.
Okay.
So if you want to walk from Assisi to Greccio, and if you walk well and you walk all day, it will probably take 3 days, I would say.
Wow.
3 days. Since you asked for details, and I like to tell story, I have something to tell you about my first visit to Greccio. That was in August 1969, and I was in pilgrimage with 3 companions. And we had a car, a small car, and we left our car in a town called Terni, that we thought was close enough to reach Greccio in 1 day. Well, we lost our direction. And at the end of the day, we were literally in the middle of nowhere. It's a dear memory to me. In the middle of nowhere, the sun was down, it was getting dark, and it was clear that we would never make it to Greccio. And we had to think of, sleeping somewhere. And we saw like a shack. So, that's great. So we get to the shack. Well, the shack was full of pigs. But there was an upper level with straw bales. So we climbed up, and it was, after all that, the comfort on straw, and so we slept very well. The next day, the sun rises, we get up, we fold up everything, and we start walking. With the sun, we redirect ourselves. But one after the other, begin to feel a big need to scratch. We had received fleas from the pigs. I had never had fleas in my life. So when we arrived at Greccio, at the Eremo, talking of pilgrimage, we introduced ourselves and we said, first of all, do you have a shower? So that was my first experience at Greccio, arriving with fleas, and asking for a shower, changing clothes, and feeling much comfortable after that. Yes.
Very much like Francis and the first guys who probably had that experience.
That I didn't want to say that, but it's in my mind, I connect it like that.
For sure, for sure. I have to go, folks, but thank you very much.
Okay.
Great to see you.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Are we okay? We say good night?
Good night and thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful, Jean-François.
Thank
you. Thank you so much.
You did it.
Good night.
And Connie, what are you building? What are you